Welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast, the show where Papa Tom spreads wisdom like a smear of cream cheese on an everything bagel. Here's your host, Thom Jennings.
All right, well, welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast. And I've had a succession of guests the last few shows, so we're back to the single person format, just me. And the topic for this week is, can you make a difference? And I think it's a topic that came about because of a conversation that I had this weekend. And if you know anything about me, if this is the first time you've ever turned into an episode of Bagel Logic, I'll just give you a little bit of background. One of the part-time jobs that I have is as a bartender. And I've bartended for many, many years, off and on. It's something I really, really enjoy. I enjoy just the human interaction and the conversations that I have with people. And I think that there's probably some in the service industry that try to avoid real heady topics or any kind of controversy. You know, they always say that religion and politics have no place in a bar and things like that. And I think that that's true to a certain extent, but once you're in the right kind of atmosphere and you sort of establish the game rules, I mean, people understand that they can have those conversations. And, you know, you factor in alcohol, that can be a bit of a thing too as well. So obviously those are all the things that you kind of have to take in consideration if you're going to enter into any topic that's particularly controversial. Well, anyhow, a friend came in and they were talking with me at the bar, and this was a younger person, I think late 20s, early 30s about, and they had seen a meme on social media. It was an anti-trans meme. I'll be honest with you, I wasn't particularly familiar with the situation. If you follow these things in the news, maybe you know it better than I do, and probably for show prep, I should have looked into it more. But it had something to do with a person that was born male that was competing in female swimming competitions and some legal things and everything going on with it. But ultimately, you know, the kind of the nature of this particular meme that was shared by this individual was, I guess, for lack of a better term, intolerant, anti-trans, you know, whatever. And those situations get difficult because, I mean, I'm 55 years old, so the language changes and situations change as time goes on. But it seems to me, I also, my day job, I work in the mental health field. So the trans situation has sort of evolved right in front of my eyes. Now, when I worked in a restaurant bar back in the late 1980s, maybe early 90s, I worked with a gentleman who was a waiter, and he used to perform as a female in beauty contests. And, you know, his name was Carl. And I honestly, to this day, looking back, I don't know if he was gay or straight. He was, I guess back in those days, you called them a cross-dresser. And I believe that trans is very different from cross-dressing. But, you know, the point is that this isn't necessarily supposed to be an episode where I even pretend to be an expert on any of this stuff at all. What it comes down to is that as a society, I think we go through phases of tolerance and intolerance to different people's lifestyles. And in this case, this young person had come to me and they were saying that, you know, here's this meme that's being shared, and it really professes an intolerant theme towards another individual. Now, to complicate matters, the business that was putting this meme out there was a business that prided itself on Christian values and things like that. Now, when it comes to a business that positions itself as a Christian business, I have kind of a weird background when it comes to this as well. You know, it seems like this is just like an ongoing theme. My weird life. Maybe that's what I should change the podcast to, from Bagel Logic to My Weird Life. But I think it's important, you know, whenever you hear somebody's opinion, you have to get a little bit of background on where they're coming from, you know, where they've been, all that kind of stuff. So many, many years ago, I used to work at a company called United Church Directories, and our business model is that we would go into churches, we'd take family pictures, we'd give the free 8x10 as kind of, dangle that out there. And then we would proceed to sell photo packages to the families or individuals. I mean, there were cases that we had individuals as well. My biggest sale, strangely enough, was at a African American church in Rochester, New York, and this gentleman came in an orange leisure suit, and this is, leisure suits, I guess, were a 70s thing, but I mean, this thing is bright orange, and I wasn't really expecting to sell much, and he wound up buying this 16 by 20 reprint, fully framed with a custom frame, and it had like some kind of lacquer over it or something over the top of it to make it look like it was an oil painting, and it was just bizarre. But I worked with a lot of churches, and it was always kind of a balancing act, because since there were so many denominations, you couldn't really position yourself as being a member of a particular denomination. And I was raised Catholic, but I attended a Protestant church and whatnot. But one of the things about the company that I appreciated was that they never really positioned themselves as this Christian company. I mean, we were a family portrait company that sold to churches. So I think that took a lot of pressure off me as a salesperson, maybe even the photographer and everybody that worked for the company. Even when we went to these shindigs where everybody from the company was there, they wouldn't, get into this whole prayer thing or anything like that. And within there was sort of a subculture within the company. Like if we had a mass meeting of the company, that there were groups of people that were very religious and were in this business because of their faith, but the company itself was not led by a Christian, nor did they say, "Oh, we are a Christian-owned company," or any of that kind of stuff, because we serviced other organizations, schools, things like that. So, in case you've completely lost me, so again, going back to this young lady who comes in, she says, "Well, here's this meme that's being posted, and it's by a person in the community that is an owner of a business that professes itself to be Christian. And my understanding of Christian values is that they are supposed to be, tolerant and all this kind of stuff." And, we got to talking about it, and I've just always found sort of the using the quasi mission to say, "Oh, this business is Christian, it's a mission," and all this kind of stuff is a bit disingenuous, especially if you're a for-profit entity. But when she kind of questioned the motives of why would he post something like this? Why would he would be something that was just offensive to transgender people? Now, I get, and I think everybody gets, that if you are if you belong to a certain branch of Christianity, that you don't subscribe to, or I guess recognize, trans as a thing. And I don't, man, this is where it gets a little sticky in my mind too, because I kind of get it, but I kind of don't. So what wound up happening is that she wound up posting on his social media, and he responded, and it kind of went back and forth. And one of the responses, I guess, which is somewhat of really the theme of this particular podcast, which seemed like a bunch of rambling at this point, but it was, we'll agree to disagree. It just doesn't, that's how it is. My faith doesn't allow me to believe in this as a thing. But, my problem was, I guess you go back to, you don't necessarily have to agree with somebody or their faith or any of that other stuff. It doesn't necessarily mean that you make fun of it either, or try to stir up your base or stir up your clientele at the expense of another individual. And, the tough part is that this person is, in certain circles, he's very well respected in the business community. And so it makes it that much harder to really figure out a way that you can feel like you can make a difference when somebody says or does something that you find particularly offensive. And it really does create a sense of helplessness. And I think I felt that sort of helplessness with this young lady. And I've experienced that same type of helplessness where you have people that make fun of other people and you just, you kind of don't know what to do because you're always going to walk that slippery slope. Now, I find also that the other thing that you could potentially do is if you engage them in social media or do anything along those lines, I mean, the reality is that you're just playing into that individual's hands. So, for example, if his marketing scheme, which is really what it is in terms of the faith-based thing or whatever, I believe in Jesus and this is a Jesus-based business, all that kind of stuff. Well, technically speaking, most people that are going to go to this particular space are going to be Christians. So the best way to get them all fired up is to put out there things that are edgy, that are offensive. I mean, even as somebody that did stand-up comedy for a little while, you do a little bit of that. And again, stand-up comedy is one of those things where you're always kind of worried about who you're going to offend and what you can do and what you can't do. And I mean, most books that I read about stand-up comedy said that the big thing that you always should do and be very mindful of is that you should always hit up and not hit down. So, and that's just a way of saying, hey, you know what, have some class. Keep in mind other people. It's okay to tell some jokes and whatnot. If it offends somebody and there's no intent on it, move on. Don't tell the joke anymore, whatever. And so anyhow, it just felt like that this particular person was really just doing one of those things to kind of have people go, oh, this meme is really funny. And yeah, we're all here in our particular branch of Christianity or whatever you want to call it. We don't subscribe to this trans thing. And as I said, one of the things that said, well, we'll just agree to disagree. We'll have a difference of opinion. And it's always weird to me when people say that you can chalk up something to just a difference of opinion. Because we all have differences of opinion. Now, if you get down to the core of it, I'm a heterosexual male, which means that I'm attracted to females. I am not attracted to other males. And so my wife is a heterosexual female who's attracted to males. Hence, she is my wife. She was attracted to me and I was attracted to her. So I don't understand what she sees in men. I don't get it. And is that a difference of opinion? I mean, if you look at it in the way that people look at maybe gay parents or, gay couples, gay marriage, the trans, the gender identity, everybody kind of has their own thing. And you just have to think about, well, who's it really hurting, And I think making fun of, or I should say, taking a meme that's making fun of a trans person is, and then professing yourself as a Christian, it just doesn't make any sense. So what you're saying is that there's a particular group of individuals that are expendable. Okay. So I think myself and this young lady were very much in agreement when it came to all of that stuff. Now, I don't want to position myself as some kind of I'm not going to run out to any LGBTQ rally, any of that kind of stuff. It's not something I'm really particularly passionate about, but I'm intolerant when it comes to people picking on gay people just for the sake of their choice as far as who they want to be with, and really this whole gender identity thing as it has evolved. I just think it's like a whatever. I think a lot of people are making a big to-do about nothing. If somebody wants to identify as a particular gender, it really comes down to a name. I mean, the name man, the name woman, it came from somewhere. Somebody began with that name. So if we changed it, there's man is different in other languages. And so, whatever. A name is a name. I realized that it probably goes deeper than that for those particular individuals. And hey, man, I totally respect that. And I would be willing to have a conversation with anybody that wants to maybe have an in-depth discussion about it. And I've attended trainings and all that stuff or whatever. But we for some reason, it seems like that particular group, the trans group right now, has become a target. Like they're just sort of on the bottom of the totem pole. And as a fat guy, like, I kind of get it, and I'm bald too. So, I mean, I get picked on because I'm fat. I get picked on because I'm bald, whatever. And because I'm old. So I get the being picked on. It's not right, no matter how you look at it. And now to just kind of turn this thing into where everybody gets worried about, who's using what bathroom or any of that kind of stuff. I don't know, man. I just don't get it. And I'm not trying to alienate anybody from listening to this podcast. I don't expect people that you have to be like-minded. I'm not trying to offend anybody. I'm just trying to give you something to think about. And I think that in some ways that the way I think is probably the way a lot of people my age think, because of the fact that we didn't really grow up with these kinds of discussions. And ultimately, it hasn't become such a huge deal. And we've just sort of learned to live with changes because changes happen throughout our lives. Now, changes happen because people are willing to take a stand and they want to make a difference. And I think that we as a society, if we're going to, again, evolve to the next level in terms of tolerance and everybody gets all upset about cancel culture. And let me tell you something, there would be no cancel culture if we would just learn how to talk to each other. I don't know everybody in the world. I mean, I'm not an expert and I haven't done any kind of, I don't have any scientific basis for this per se, but at the end of the day, we all say things that are insensitive. We all do it. Every single darn last one of us at some point in our life has done that. I've done it. I will do it again before I die. I've probably said some things in this particular podcast that are somewhat insensitive. But until you can get to the point where we can accept that, like, okay, man, we say things that are insensitive. Let's have a conversation about it. And instead of it turning into an argument where I have to be right and you have to be right, why don't we just have a discussion and maybe come to a particular conclusion. Now, again, going back to the one person stand that says, well, we'll just have a difference of opinion when it comes to the trans lifestyle. Okay, I totally get it. I agree. You can have that difference of opinion when it comes to that particular lifestyle, but that's not a license to pick on an individual or to promote your business through a meme that is attacking a particular group. It's in a group that is a minority. They're a minority. They're a very small minority. For all the attention that trans people get, they still represent a very small portion of the population. And my goodness, they have managed to soak up a lot of hate. They really have. But anyhow, but can we make a difference? So I tell you this, the thing that I respected was that this individual did address it, that they addressed it head on with this particular business owner. But, then as the discussion evolved with more people, it was kind of like, when everybody was putting their heads together and saying, well, what do we do now? Like, what can we really do if this individual clearly didn't get the message, wasn't even able to go to the point and say, hey, man, I probably shouldn't have done this. And this wasn't the first issue that this person had regarding trans lifestyle or whatever. So they're just going to continue to do it. And it's like, well, how do you make a difference? How do you teach a lesson? How do you do something that's gonna make an impact? And she mentioned something along the lines of, maybe I'll stand on a street corner and hold a sign. And to me, it's like, man, if you held a sign outside this person's business, it would just be a way to promote their business. They would be martyred. I look at that guy. I joke sometimes with people. I use the term Tiananmen Square. And if you're not familiar with it, many years ago, there was this young student in the middle of Tiananmen Square in China. They were protesting against the government. And there's this line of tanks. And there's this one individual, and he's standing there, and all the tanks are lined up, and they're stopped because they're not going to run over them. And you look at that guy, and you go, man, there's a dude that really has some conviction that's willing to just stand for what they believe in and go against what they think is an oppressive government. Now, the problem is, literally nobody knows who this person is. They were presumably arrested. Who knows? They could be dead by now. And many years later, China's government really hasn't changed. And I don't relate that story necessarily to say that every effort at major change is futile. I kind of present that story in a way to just say that, those are the types of things that I think people look at and can be frustrated and can be discouraged when it comes to addressing these delicate situations that come up. And, again, the question is, can you make a change? And, there's a part of me that my feathers were definitely ruffled, and I had given the idea. I said, hey, why don't we get 10 trans people together and we'll go, have coffee at this guy's place of business and see if he serves them. And then we'll go from there. I mean, if he feels that he can make fun of them and on his social media posts, we'll see if he'll take their money. And, I think on some level that's not a bad idea, but I don't know that it would work. I don't know if that's genuinely something that is positive, if it would create some kind of change, if it would create a level of an uncomfortability, if it would be perceived as something other than it really is. Because to me, my end game would be, well, you know what, if you get a bunch of trans people in a room, you're going to realize that it's just not a big deal. I have students that are trans. I have students, I've had waited on people at the bars that trans. It's just to me, sure, we'll say something like, oh, is that a dude? Is that a woman? Whatever. That's that uncomfortable moment that I have, that maybe some of my coworkers have, but it doesn't really go beyond that. And again, I've always believed that in terms of intolerance, it all relates back to not spending time with individuals who have differing views. That's what it comes down to. And so on some level, who knows, man, maybe if there was a group of people that went to this gentleman's business on a regular basis, it would somehow get him in a situation where he would be around these people and realize that it's not a situation where it's just a disagreement or we have different values or whatever, that they're just people and we can all get along on some level. And, as I mentioned before, I spent a lot of time in churches and because I sold to them. So I see all these different denominations, the ones that were really hardcore Protestants, Catholics. I worked with a Presbyterian church that was really openly gay friendly. And when we were selling our portrait packages, most of the couples were, same-sex couples. Almost all of them. This is before same-sex marriage was even legal in most states, if anywhere in the country. So I had the advantage of really seeing both perspectives. I was working with church groups that were completely intolerant of homosexuality and same-sex marriage, and I was working with churches that were openly tolerant of it. And honestly, as much as I should sit here and say, well, these really hardcore right-wing Christians are just awful people and blah, 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 they're not. I often struggle with the fact that I think that there are people that have differing viewpoints and somehow have a level of hatred, whether it be towards immigrants, whether it be towards people of a different race, whether it be of people of a different sexual preference, even people that like a different sports team. There's hate. Hate comes from all kinds of different areas, but I generally, a lot of these people, you meet them and they're pretty good people, like all the way around. Everything else going on in their life, they're just really good people. But then they have this one view that they hold on to that's really difficult. And so then you have two choices. You as an individual can become tolerant of their viewpoint, and because you don't necessarily want to damage the relationship, or you can address it and you can attempt to make a difference. And, it can backfire. It backfires all the time. I've had individuals that I've been friends with, that was friends with for years and years and years. And there was just certain topics that we just didn't discuss. The old terminology is, well, you got to walk on eggshells around this person. You don't want to talk about this. You don't want to talk about that. And I dealt with a lot of guilt when it came to that, because it really, in some ways, it's my inability to at least be comfortable enough in my own skin to profess what my beliefs are, my political party, my religion, any of those kind of things, that if I'm not willing to take a stand, then I kind of got to live with that. And it really just means that the relationship is built on, it's just built on shifting ground, and it's not firm. And eventually that relationship is going to fall apart. And I've had that happen in certain situations. But, most times I have a lot of friends that disagree with me on 80% of my views when it comes to politics, when it comes to life, when it comes to a lot of things. And, as I said, even the intent of this podcast is not for me to sit here and pontificate and stand on and sermonize and say, hey, this is the only way that it has to be. I think what I'm trying to do is offer the fact that we all do have differing perspectives, but we also owe it to ourselves to have open and honest conversations with each other about these types of things. And also when it comes to just sitting back and not taking on individuals that maybe have a public role or own a business, and then everybody says, well, everybody loves this guy, so we don't want to go after him, because if we do, it's only going to reflect upon us. And there's truth to that. Again, it kind of goes back to that Tiananmen Square thing. Yeah, maybe that guy is iconic because he's standing in front of a line of tanks, but he really didn't accomplish anything. But in this case, it's not standing in front of a bunch of tanks, is it? It may just be a question of, again, organizing 10 people to go in there and have coffee once a week. It could be any number of things. It may expose the fact that there's something disingenuous about this particular individual and how they are marketing their business. But, when we just step back and go, yeah, there's really nothing we can do. It's tough. It really is. And, I've dealt with these situations throughout my life, and I've had so many of them backfire. We had a situation in our family, for example, that my sister-in-law, she had posted on a social media site about the fact that, she was at Wegmans and, the lazy blacks and Arabs all took up the handicap spots, and none of them have jobs, and, they don't belong in this country and all this stuff. So it was just this nasty anti-immigrant stuff and anti-black. And I just politely addressed it. I said, hey, that's ridiculous. Like, you don't post that stuff in public. Don't hold on to that. And then the retort was, well, you wouldn't care unless your daughter-in-law was black. Because your daughter-in-law is black, it's the only reason you care. And I was just sitting there thinking to myself, wow, like, is that it? So, like, it's funny because on some level, that speaks to the concept that I was talking about earlier. It's tolerance. So maybe if you don't have anybody you're not exposed to any black people, you don't have them in your life, never went to school with them, and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden your kid comes home and, he marries this wonderful woman and she's black, and you go, oh my gosh, black people aren't really that bad after all. So now I have to defend them. Now that's not the case. I certainly, I don't really care. I mean, that wasn't what changed my mind about black people. I've never had an issue with black people. I grew up with them. I mean, they're all around me. I grew up with people of all colors, religions, everything. It's never been a big deal with me. I was fortunate in that respect. And so the whole thing was just very offensive on so many levels. And, I was trying to look at it, and as a person whose day job is as a teacher, they always use the term, teachable moment. It's a teachable moment. So I had this teachable moment with my sister-in-law, and ultimately it just turned into a back and forth, angry exchange, and she wasn't going to change her mind, and I wasn't going to change my mind, and we never spoke again. And then she died. So it's tough. But you know what? If I look back on that right now, should I have addressed it? Well, sure. Absolutely. And before that incident, we got along okay. We weren't like best of friends or anything. My wife and I used to go visit her, and, she lived in an apartment by herself, and we had pleasant visits. I didn't mind her. My wife had a history with her because they grew up together, and siblings, there's always a lot of complexities there. But ultimately, I had no beef with her. And so it was difficult to lose that particular relationship and have to deal with all the repercussions of that. But, as I said, at some point you've got to be true to yourself. Sometimes you do stand in front of that tank and have to put up with the consequences. Did I make a difference with her? I don't know. I mean, I'd like to think that I did. I mean, I feel like if you lose a family member is not talking to you because of your views that are basically not accepted in civilized society, that it's going to make you think about it, at least think about it a little bit. And I don't have the luxury of discussing it with her. She's gone. And, it's always difficult. And it's funny because I've had even people that have been close to me, not close to me, I should say coworkers. I mean, I had an incident once at one employer where we had a couple that we were working with. And when they had started working with us, I was a social worker at the time. This is where, if you're listening to this podcast for the first time, you go, how many freaking jobs has this guy had? Well, the answer is a lot. I really have. Hence why I never run out of material or stories when it comes to pretty much any situation. But we had a couple that when they started working with us, they were husband and wife, and both one person identified, the husband identified as male, the wife identified as female, and then the husband transitioned to female. So then we were using the female pronoun, and we had this family gathering. And at the family gathering, there was some people, again, you mix these different groups, and one of the guys had asked the person who had recently transitioned into a female, he says, well, now that you've transitioned into a female, has it had an impact on your car insurance? And I think that, you hear that and you go, oh, it's funny on some levels, but I think that when I look back on it, it was a comment that was the way that he presented it. It really wasn't meant to be a joke, and it wasn't meant to be disrespectful. This was a guy who was legitimately just making conversation. And he was one of my clients, so I'd worked with him. I sort of knew what he, this is kind of the guy he was. He's the kind of guy that just said some things off the cuff. I mean, something popped into his head. That's what he said. So she got really offended by it. And then there was another person that was there at the meeting, and they overheard it, and I addressed it, and I just said, hey, I just don't think that that's an appropriate topic of discussion. So let's pick something else to talk about. And that's all I said. So then I get called into the office, and my boss says to me, sits me down. He says, we heard that there was an incident last night at the family get together. I said, yeah. He said, well, this client, she complained that there were some comments that were made that were very insensitive with regard to, her status and everything. And I said, oh, okay. Well, I mean, I know that something had come up, and I had addressed it. And he says, well, listen, I want to let you know that I know you're from a rural area, and people from your area tend to be very intolerant when it comes to this type of stuff, but you really need to keep your personal opinions to yourself. And I'm just looking at this guy going, who do you think you're talking to? But it's crazy that there was that kind of assumption that, I don't know, white male from a rural area, that I'm just going to be automatically trans intolerant. But you know what? I get it, because the reality is that there was a lot of people that lived in the community that I lived in at that time that were that way. And certainly it wouldn't have been a view that was considered, I don't know, unusual out there. It doesn't mean that I'm going to subscribe to it. But again, kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. So, and honestly, I never had a good working relationship with this woman, because it just felt like, she was just always looking out for me to slip up in terms of using the wrong pronoun or any of that kind of stuff. but that didn't jade me in terms of like every individual who identifies as trans. I mean, it's like saying that all the white people that ripped me off or, jilted me or fired me or whatever, it's like, well, now I got to hate white people because one of them did something bad to me. But, and I don't know that necessarily fits neatly with the entire topic at hand, but I think it does in the sense that when we're talking about, I guess what we're talking about is we're talking about these issues that can be very sensitive. And I think that there's a tendency to kind of go from one extreme to another, but by the same token, they really all have to be addressed. And, at the end of the day, even as much as I was accused of being insensitive when it came to dealing with this person, it wasn't true. We eventually, again, the reason we didn't get along is because I thought she was a jerk. I just didn't like her as a person. And that's just the reality. You don't get a free pass just because of your gender identity or anything like that. And I don't have a problem saying that. But it was, again, that could be misperceived as a hatred towards that particular group. But again, my point here is that still there's two separate conversations. There's a conversation of me and that person as individuals, which is I'm free to hate them for who they are, what their personality is, and but I'm not free to use derogatory terms to describe that person. I mean, if I use the term jerk, jerk is universal. You have jerks of it. It's not something that applies to a particular race or a particular sexual identity, any of that stuff. And I don't have license to just, make fun of people because of their gender identity, their sexual preference, any of that kind of stuff. Hetero, sexual, homosexual, whatever. And so, I get the frustration. I said, I thought it was a great conversation that we had at the bar in terms of this particular topic. And certainly this episode of the podcast didn't necessarily go the direction that I was originally planning because these tend to be very improvisational in case you can't tell at this point. But I'm going to wrap it up with my, just my general thoughts and hopefully some of the takeaways that you have. And you know what? I get it. Sometimes when you see hate, you got to call it out. You just do. You got to call it for what it is. And, but you got to understand that there's potentially going to be some consequences. There are. And sometimes those consequences they'll backfire. They will. It'll roll back on you, and it'll just make the situation worse. If those consequences aren't too bad, then I guess you got to take that calculated risk. Again, we're not all going to be the dude standing in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square. I mean, most of us are just going to have maybe a person that either we were never friends with, won't be friends with us ever, or somebody that we had a mild friendship with that, or an acquaintance with that is no longer our friend. Because your friends deal with differences of opinion. That's what they do. That's the basis of friendship. Same with family, if you have differences of opinion. But again, going back to what I said, there's a difference between a difference of opinion and an attack. You can't just chalk every bit of like your hatred of having a difference of opinion. I don't like hip hop music. I don't use that as a justification to not like African Americans. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So you don't have to like the trans person's choice in terms of their gender identity. You should respect it. And really, I think, and again, this whole thing where everybody gets all, their nose has been out of shape, like, well, they want to be called a sheep and I'm going to call them a he. No. It's like, why? Well, what? And is that going to show them? Is that going to change them? Is that going to make you look better? I mean, it's really not. If it just makes matters worse. And I don't know. So, again, I think we all do have a civic duty to address people that are making fun of people, that are marginalizing them, that are dehumanizing them. I don't know why we've reached a low. I mean, it just seems to me, maybe because I'm older and I use this term with some other people. It's like, well, maybe this is just the old man talking in me. because I'm 55 years old. But it seems like, we've made some really solid advances when it comes to certain things. But man, there's just certain things that we just really, as a society, just struggle with. And I think a lot of it just chalks up to the fact that we aren't willing to discuss things. We're not just willing to have conversations or arguments. It's okay to have an argument. An argument, a productive argument it's okay as long as it doesn't turn into name calling. You can argue. I've argued with a lot of people over my life, and some of those people have made arguments that have convinced me that my point of view was wrong. So don't discount that. Don't discount the fact that a good argument every now and then is it can be healthy. And I'm not talking like, man, it's like, here we go off into another bunny trail, but it's like these people that say, we fight, if you don't fight as a couple, you'll never get along together. I'm not talking about that kind of argument. I'm talking about an intellectual argument. It doesn't have to be yelling, screaming, name calling. It's an argument. It's a little bit more than just a discussion. I think a discussion is where people tend to be a little bit more like-minded. When I think of argument, I think you got two people that are on the opposite side of the spectrum when it comes to a particular topic. So, anyhow, I hope you got something out of this. I'm probably going to listen back to it and go, what on God's green earth was I talking about during this particular episode? Who knows what I was talking about? But if you enjoyed this particular episode, and I would appreciate a like, a review, any of that kind of good stuff. A podcast, it's actually been doing pretty well. Our numbers are up. I have a companion podcast, not a companion podcast, but I do another podcast with my sister as well. And I'm not going to plug that now. I will at some point. And I'm mentioning my sister because I don't think she'll ever make it to the end of this episode. I love talking about people that are likely never going to listen to my podcast. But anyhow, until next time, this is Thom Jennings with the Bagel Logic Podcast, the rambling, crazy, logical, twisted, insane podcast by me, Thom Jennings. And I'll see you next time. Thanks again.